This month at Manor Park Classics, we have one of the definitive, actually, I was going to say one of the definitive 90s performance cars, but I'm actually going to say it. This is the definitive 90s performance car. Of course, it's a Subaru Impreza Turbo 2000, and I say that based on its UK context. We'll get to that shortly, and there are many cars that could take that title, but I just think that with what this car did, with how well known this car became, with the people that did so many things with it, this is the definitive 90s performance car. But the first generation Subaru Impreza launched in 1992, and at the beginning it was just Subaru's new small family saloon. In Japan, many of them were front-wheel drive, and they were available with engines as small as 1500cc with as little as 95 brake horsepower. So what? They aren't particularly pretty, they are very reliable of course, but there's nothing about this car on the surface as a normal standard Impreza that is particularly impressive. But very shortly after its launch, of course, this car became the centre of Subaru's World Rally Experimental, WRX to you and me, taking over from the larger Legacy. Now, the Legacy had been around for a number of years by this point, and it was really quite successful, and it was a brilliant car to everyone who knew what it was. In the UK, quite rare, but they were a great car, and this car is a shortened version of the Legacy platform, therefore a little bit more suitable maybe for rallying, but that's how the Japanese motor industry operates. We have one kind of central platform of which all the models are spun off, and what a great platform it was to start with. Because rather than any other manufacturer's standard small family saloon from the early 1990s, these Subarus were thoroughbreds. Of course, Subaru is best known for its four-wheel drive, and all of them in the UK did end up being four-wheel drive. But with that, we have the flat-four boxer engine, of course, mounted longitudinally with the gearbox behind it. That not only keeps the weight really low down in the chassis, but it also means that at the front you have equal length drive shafts, which means there is much less torque steer. Being engineered from the outset as well to be four-wheel drive and having a longitudinally mounted engine means that there is no compromise within these cars from a mechanical perspective. Other cars of this kind of style and this kind of type had to make do, as you might expect, with unequal length drive shafts at the front, but also that meant that power-wise they were always front biased. Ford managed to get around this in the World Rally World, let's go with it, by launching the Escort Cosworth, which wasn't an Escort. The Escort Cosworth was actually a Sierra Cosworth, with its four-wheel drive intact, just with an Escort body placed over the top. That means that that car had to be special. It was hewn from a totally different base car to the Escort that you'd see on the streets. And therefore it means that this was infinitely more accessible and acceptable as a proper performance car from the outset. No matter what version of the original Impreza you chose in the UK, you were getting that inherent rightness with the chassis. Now, this, of course, as I mentioned, is an Impreza Turbo 2000. We all know about the WRX and the STI, of course, but originally in the UK, they didn't sell officially the WRX. This was our WRX. A few little bits tweaked, but for all intents and purposes, it is a WRX. They've just badged it as a Turbo 2000. That means that we don't get front-wheel drive and little 1500cc boxers. Instead, this is a 2-litre engine with a stonking great turbocharger on it, and of course, four-wheel drive. So, while we go to talk a little bit more about its history and why this car actually matters, let's go for a drive. In the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the Subaru Legacy was met with mixed success in world rallying. It certainly didn't disgrace itself, but it wasn't absolutely setting the world alight. It was the wrong kind of car compared to the Delta Integrales and the Celica GT4s that were ruling the world at this point. So when they introduced the smaller Impreza and really got it up on song, they did find success. In 1995, and very famously, Colin McRae became World Rally Champion at the wheel of one of these cars. In Britain, that made this car a bit of a national treasure almost overnight. Incredibly so, in a way nobody could have ever imagined only a few years beforehand. Therefore, this became the car to be seen in the UK. These were really quite popular in period in a way you just wouldn't imagine, and other 90s performance cars weren't. You didn't see S-chassis Nissans or Toyota Supras in the UK. You saw Subaru Imprezas. So this being the UK's WRX, it has that big turbocharger and 208 brake horsepower. In period, therefore, and in quite a small car, that makes it more than lively enough. Looking out in front of me, all I can see is that huge bonnet scoop. And you've got that characteristic boxer engine rumble, followed by that whoosh of the turbocharger as it comes on boost. It's a dramatic car to drive from something that on paper is relatively humdrum. Certainly in here, the Impreza is nothing to write home about. It's a normal small family saloon. But then it does that. And you have that blow-off noise. So from looking like a normal kind of family saloon, it has that mad body kit, it has the brilliantly cool, if very simple alloy wheels, the vents everywhere, and of course the huge wing on the back. And in here, we have a Momo steering wheel and these very buckety, bolstered, they are almost bucket seats, really. So visually, it's really brought ahead of the game to the point where this was a bit of a poser's car as well in period. This is a car that even non-car enthusiasts would drive because they wanted to be seen in it. That did lead Subaru to get a bit of a mixed reputation in the UK, where on one hand they were very old money in the way that the kind of people who bought them were sensible. They knew what they wanted and they knew that they were getting a thoroughly well-designed car. But the people who bought Impreza Turbos, maybe not quite so much. Maybe they were a little bit more about sitting on a seafront in an evening and revving the nuts off their boxer engine. That kind of thing. So it has this strange, Subaru in the 90s, should I say, has this strange duality to its character. This car showing the latter side of that. And everything about the way you interact with this car feels performance-y in a sense. So the power steering is probably the least part of that, but it has a decent weighting to it nonetheless. Not much feel, but it has a weight. Similarly, the clutch pedal is, I would expect, heavier than it is on a normal Impreza, and you've got to put effort into changing gear. There is just a granite hewn feeling you get through this car that you, I assume, wouldn't get otherwise. You can see that I'm just putting that little bit more effort into this really notchy, really mechanical feeling gearbox. And then you've got the noise of the drivetrain over it all. And of course, with that boxer rumble just sat burbling away beneath it all. So unsurprisingly, right from the start, we have the correct recipe. We've got low centre of gravity, we've got proper four-wheel drive system, we've got a big turbocharger, and that means that the whole car, not only in its quality, but in its feeling on the road, is solid. Yes, it became well known for people to wrap these round trees, but that wasn't the fault of the car, it was because it was so fast, and people really weren't used to the speed and the cornering ability this had, that then it caught poor talent in drivers, more often than not. But this car just has a poise about it. It never feels... It feels unflappable, is what I'm trying to say. And being unflappable is really the best compliment you can give a performance car. One that doesn't scare you, one that inspires confidence. So if you like the look of this little Subaru, then do head over to the website and maybe come and have a look for yourself.